I could not tolerate a single day with this guy. I couldn't. I would commit murder. He is by far the worst love interest that I have read so far. Thanks to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video. More about them later. For the last video that I'm gonna post in the year 2023, it will be, of course, the worst books I have read this year. I don't know why people like watching these videos so much. I think it's just because you love negativity. Well, you came to the right place because I am filled with hatred and negativity, especially when it comes to these books. I went through all of the books I have read this year and I have narrowed it down to 5 of the worst books. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they are objectively the worst books ever, although when you get lower to the list, maybe they could be. You might even recognize some of them because some of these books were so bad that I had to make an entire video dedicated to how bad they were and reading out loud all of the terrible lines. And some of these books I haven't mentioned on the channel yet because I plan on dedicating a video to it in the future. So you have that to look forward to as well. I love how whenever people are new to my channel and they don't like it when I rant about books, they try to catch me in a gotcha moment and say, well, you hate all of these books, but you're giving money to the authors anyway. And this is where I go, actually, I've never bought a book because I support my local libraries. So the fact that that didn't cross your mind, Becky, shows to me that you don't support your local libraries out there. So if any of the books that I've talked about in this video intrigue you to pick it up anyway, just to see how bad it could be, I want to remind you that you don't have to spend money on these books. You can just go ahead and borrow it from the library and see for yourself. I will always encourage making smart financial decisions like that. And that's why I'm thankful for today's sponsor. Cue the clip from Future Cindy. I recently settled down in a brand new apartment. So with me furnishing everything from scratch and also starting a big girl job in the city, there were a lot of income streams and things that I was spending a lot of money on that I had a lot of trouble keeping track of. So that's why I'm glad that Rocket Money is here to help. They're a personal finance app that helps you do things like manage your subscriptions, lower your bills, make a custom budget, and grow your savings all in one place. I really like using Rocket Money for budgeting because, again, I was not the kind of person that could keep up with it consistently. It just automatically does everything for you. It analyzes your spending habits, it creates a custom budget, it automatically monitors your spending by different categories, and then it gives you notifications whenever you've exceeded your limits. Another thing that I really like about them is that they help you cancel your subscriptions. They identify these recurring charges, and then any subscriptions that you don't want after all, they can help cancel it for you. So if you would like to try out the app and take more control of your finances, you can go to rocketmoney.com/withcindy, and from there you can download a free trial and see if it's for you or not and how much easier the app makes your life. And now let's go ahead and watch the rest of the video. I went through all the books I've read and decided to rank it to the worst 5, starting from the least worst to later in the video you'll get to my number 1, which would probably be the worst book out of all of them. So starting with number 5, you might be familiar with this because I dedicated a video to it. The book is called Hooked, and it is a dark romance book that became popular on BookTok, which really should indicate all you need to know. This is a fairy tale reimagining of Peter Pan with a dark romance twist. The main guy is based off of Captain Hook, and he has one goal throughout his entire life, and it is to destroy Peter Pan. In this story, the Peter character is a rich businessman, so I can't really fault Captain Hook for that. We love taking down the rich, and I too hate business majors. Hook realizes that there's an opportunity to exact his revenge when he notices a woman enter his bar. This woman is Wendy, who happens to be Peter's daughter, and this is where he concocts his plan that he will seduce this girl, take her virginity, then throw her to the streets. I think it's like an ego macho thing because he's really caught up in the idea of letting Peter know that he banged his daughter. Since this is dual perspective, we also get to read about Wendy, who is of course a very naive, innocent, sheltered girl. The only reason why she showed up at that bar in the first place is because her friends happened to be skanks, so they wanted to hoe it up in these bars. But Wendy is not that kind of girl. That's how you know she's different. That fact really gets emphasized in the book a lot, and I'm like, okay, so you're just a loser who doesn't like to go out. Join the fucking club. But of course, when she meets Hook, who happens to be the guy that all of her skank friends want, but he won't pay attention to because he's only paying attention to Wendy, and she's like, oh my god, me? This sparks their instant connection, and she knows that he's so dangerous, but she can't help but be attracted to him anyway. She was really such an easy victim because the whole time that she's thinking about how hot this is, when you read his perspective, he literally has thoughts about banging her on top of her dad dad's dead body. That's another thing that's kind of weird about this book, because like obviously he does fall for her throughout the book, like genuinely, but it's always connected to her dad. Like it's not enough that he gets to bang her, but her dad has to be watching as well, or they have to do it on top of her dad's dead body. And it's like, at this point, if your entire motivation for having sex with this woman and what gives you pleasure for having sex with her in the first place always involves a man, this is kind of giving me gay vibes for real. It honestly is like the gayest way you could have sex with a woman. Like he might as well just be shouting her dad's name while they do it. I'm just saying, I wouldn't be surprised if it has happened at least once. One of the qualities about this love interest is that he becomes so violent and feral in order to defend her, because his whole rationale is that even though he's using her, that means that she belongs to him, therefore other people cannot mess with her. Only he can. So when you get scenarios where she's working a shitty job in a coffee shop and a customer is being a rude asshole to her, he's gonna go ahead and kidnap that person and torture him for disrespecting his woman. He's gonna cut off the guy's tongue and kill him. And I can definitely see for people who work in retail or customer service, this is pretty much the biggest gesture of love that you could do for somebody. So that's why I'm putting it as number 5 on my worst books list, because I see the entertainment value in it. I see how people would enjoy this book. However, what I noticed by the time I finished it was that pretty much all of the dark twisted stuff that he does is really just in his own mind. Like yeah, he'll torture random side characters, but when it comes to the romance department, it's not actually dark as the book talk girlies are proclaiming. Does he fantasize about having sex with her on top of the dad's dead body? Yes. Does he actually do it? No. In actuality, a lot of the sex scenes are very vanilla. In fact, I would argue that the kinkier person is Wendy, because she's the person who's supposed to be all innocent and sweet, but then she's asking him to choke her out like she's fucking Bart Simpson. That kind of came out of nowhere. It's like, girly, where did you learn that from? But for him, he doesn't actually do anything that's so crazy or villainous. He's very much all talk but no walk, because he will constantly, in his perspective, think about how he is filled with so much rage and hatred and darkness. But in actuality, he just has missionary sex with Wendy and then cuddles her for the rest of the night. He'll say stuff like, I'm your worst nightmare. I'm gonna teach you a lesson. And that lesson is just giving her an orgasm. Like, wow, you really taught her. It wasn't as fucked up as I had expected from a dark romance book, so I was very underwhelmed by it, but it did make for a fun video. There were so many excerpts that I read where I was just like, what? Like there's a part where a character who is close to Hook dies. We assume it's due to Wendy's father, and Wendy decides to cheer up Hook by telling him a story about how when she was little, she used to get acorns from her dad's trips. Like whenever he came home, that was her little souvenir. He just collected acorns like she was a fucking squirrel or something. And she went on this whole monologue about this story, I guess to show that her dad isn't such a bad guy all the time. And it's like, girl, you need to fucking read the room. Your dad just killed somebody and you're trying to humanize him by talking about how he gave you acorns. Like now is not the time, dude. Anyway, I go much more in depth with the book and all of the shenanigans that occurs in it in my separate video, so I will link that in my description. Number 4 on my worst books list is gonna go to All I Want for Christmas. And I'll tell you why this book is actually worse than Hooked, even though it seems like a traditional romance. So the premise of this is that the two main characters are contestants on a reality singing competition. They don't actually like each other, but when they are on the show and they sing together, people notice the chemistry. So as a result, the producers make them a duo so that they can get more ratings. So even though they don't actually like each other, they have to fake the relationship anyway so that they can ensure their chances of winning the competition. The main girl really wants to win because as a poor bitch, she's been struggling to make it in this business, which is already hard enough for people who aren't made out of money, which leads me to the main guy, who's basically a nepo baby because his dad is a famous musician, and his whole reason for being on the show in the first place is so that he can make a name for himself outside of his dad. This to me is already giving loser vibes, because it's already bad enough that you're a nepo baby, but you're telling me that you couldn't even make it as a musician when your dad is a musician and you had all those chances and opportunities handed to you. Like, that's how you know you're actually not talented. The reason why I put this book as worse than Hooked is because the main guy is probably the worst love interest I have ever read this year. Well, Actually, never mind. We'll get to the worst love interest when we get to my #1 worst book of the year, but this guy is pretty close. So a lot of the conflicts that happens in this book is due to miscommunication. These two do not communicate whatsoever. So there's constant misunderstandings that happen, but the annoying part is every time there is a misunderstanding, the main guy just packs up and fucking leaves. I literally lost track of how many times he just runs away after every single conflict, and that to me just shows this couple will never last. Like, this was the first romance book where I actually thought to myself, this couple is not going to be long term. He will see something that the main girl gets entangled with, misunderstand the whole situation, and instead of talking to her, he'll just storm off, leave the city, literally ghost her, abandon her in the music show, get really drunk and make it everybody else's problem. And this to me shows that he has zero emotional intelligence whatsoever, and he is just so incapable of any form of communication or conflict resolution. But at least they kind of communicate, even if their only communication is him choking her out or calling her a good girl. This guy will leave you anytime he feels slightly uncomfortable. And yeah, I know that a lot of men in real life exist who behave this way, but this is fiction we're talking about. When I read a romance book, I'm not here to read a character who acts just like a real life man. The point is that he's not supposed to act like reality. That's why we seek to romance books for escapism. So the fact that he is so unreliable as a business partner, as a musician, as a romantic interest, I see no good qualities about him at all. Like, what did he even do for the main girl throughout the entire book? But perhaps what really sealed the deal for him being one of the worst love interests I've read is something that happens towards the end. So if you don't want to get spoiled, you can skip ahead to the next book, but I just got a rant about how much of a dumbass he was for this book. So I'm gonna dive into spoilers starting now. Okay, so one of the hangups that he has throughout the book is that he feels insecure about the main girl and the producer of the reality show because the producer seems to be kind of fond of the main girl. However, that producer has a reputation for being skeevy in the first place, as many men in Hollywood are. So one of the misunderstandings that happens in the middle of the book is when there is some paparazzi photos that show those two together, and the main guy, despite being a nepo baby who has a famous father and therefore should know that paparazzi photos don't mean shit and it's all sensationalism, somehow believes what the paparazzi are saying and think that the two of them really are together. And instead of asking her to clarify, he acts like a little bitch about it and starts to ghost her. He does find out later that nothing was actually going on. We go through the same cycle of him realizing he was stupid, and you would think that he would learn better by now and change. But then towards the end, one of the biggest conflicts that happens is that he ends up witnessing the main girl in a studio alone with the producer, and the producer tries to make a move on her. He tries to kiss her and she tries to fend him off, and the main guy, instead of being upset that he witnessed assault, he gets upset that his feelings are now hurt and he leaves the fucking studio. I feel like no matter how bad any other romance book is, I can at least count on the love interest to be upset when their partner gets assaulted by a man that they know has a sleazy reputation. But this guy just made it all about him and just walked out of the building super upset, not even trying to step in, try to protect her, or even try to put two and two together that maybe she didn't consent to this shit. Like, he didn't even check up on her at all. He just right away jumped to conclusions. This happens constantly throughout the book, but that was the final straw for me. Think of any other love interest in a book, they would never stand for that shit. Even the main guy in Hooked would have fucking slaughtered the sleazy producer dude. And you know what? I'm just gonna say it. Colleen Hoover's love interest would have never done that either. Granted, her love interest probably would have been the one doing the assaulting in the first place, but you know what I mean. If they had witnessed that happening to a girl that they love, they would have stepped the fuck up. So this guy in All I Want for Christmas is the biggest loser. Just even recounting what he did is making me deliberate whether he should really be in 4th place for the worst books list, because now that I want to talk about the next book, in retrospect, I don't even know if it was that bad compared to the loser behavior of this guy. But whatever, these rankings are arbitrary anyway. You can really just swap it out whenever. In 3rd place, I'm gonna put From Blood and Ash. And even though the love interest for this book isn't as much of a loser as the guy from the previous book, my rationale for putting it in 3rd place, even though again this is arbitrary, is just because the book was so fucking long that it was like kind of painful for me to get through. This was over 600 pages and it took so long for me to get through it that at some point I had to switch over to audiobook just so that I can try to force my way through it. I actually have not talked about this book at all throughout the year because I plan on filming a separate video about it because there are so many lines that I highlighted. The main girl's role in this story is that she is a maiden, which basically means that she is the most virgin-y of the virgins. She's supposed to be super pure and devote her role to ascending in the future. They basically make her out to be a super sheltered nun. She's not allowed to experience pleasure. She's not allowed to be spoken to. She's not allowed to be looked at. She's not allowed to be touched. They literally expect her to just sit in a room the whole time and watch paint dry, which probably alludes to why her personality is the way that it is. Where I get the Sarah J Maas vibes from is that it really pushes this idea of this badass girl boss main character, because even though she's very sheltered, she still has her rebellious streaks where she sneaks out and she uses slang that somehow we don't know why she even picked up that verbiage in the first place in a fantasy book. Her whole character development is basically realizing that her being silenced is a metaphor for her being silenced as a woman. She'll go on a whole monologue about how it's time to reclaim her voice, and it's almost like it was ghostwritten by Restan for his Feminism 101 seminar. The main guy is a guard who has an instant connection with her because the moment that they meet, he's already sucking on her boobies through the clothes. I don't know how often they wash their laundry back in those days. We don't really get a sense for why he has the hots for her other than the fact that she literally isn't like other girls. That's according to his point of view, because he constantly just tells her, wow, you're so unexpected. You're so intriguing. I've never met anyone like you. He also helps validate that she's beautiful because she has scars on her face. You wouldn't be able to tell if you looked up at any fan art of them because it just looks like it's a couple of strands of hair on her face, but apparently she has scars. She thinks she's hideous, but it's okay because he's here to tell her that she's beautiful, and that way she can be validated. That's how you can truly determine your worth as a person, when a man who's sucking on your tits through your sweater can validate that for you by sexualizing you. Other than him being the first person to validate her, we don't really have any other substantial reason why she would be into him other than him having amber eyes with golden flecks and dark hair and the constant smirking. Like, it's pretty much any generic love interest, but because she's sheltered, she doesn't know any better. She hasn't read any of the other million books that are out there. The main girl is very inconsistent as a character because we're supposed to believe that she's very sheltered due to the circumstances, and that's why she's so naive with obviously falling for the most generic man ever, and also not grappling with the fact that this situation that she's in with this whole ascending and being a maiden and being like a virgin or whatever is kind of sketch. Like, this is some weird institution that she is a part of. But even though she's supposed to be super isolated, she doesn't act that way because, again, she's swearing all the time. She's giving sassy girl boss character. She sneaks out by wearing a mask, and then she has this femme fatale alter ego where she can somehow kick a bunch of ass and tell off this sexy hot guard that has sexual chemistry with her. It's not consistent with the way that she has grown up. Like, how was she even able to get to that point in the first place? And if she has gotten to that point where she's able to sneak out and do her girl boss activities, how has she not even questioned the situation that has confined her in the first place? So this is where I see a lot of parallels to Sarah J Maas because of the way that strong women are depicted. They have to be a badass in the same way that men are by adopting masculine qualities. Meanwhile, rejecting very obvious caricatures of oppression and sexism, like the idea of an institution that doesn't allow women to speak or experience pleasure. And that's another thing too, like that's part of the whole feminism thing. The horniness is part of the revolutionary aspect of her blooming as a full woman. Is it feminist to reclaim sexuality after being trapped in institutions that often oppresses your sexuality or shames you for it? Yes, I see parallels to this in real life as well, especially when it comes to religious institutions. However, the way that the book depicts this, it just knocks you over the head because you could tell that the author just thought she ate every time there was a monologue of her being like, you know what? I'm gonna use my voice after all. I'm not gonna be silenced anymore. I'm gonna be an independent woman and my first choice will be sucking his dick. Girl power! I'll get more into the specifics when I make the video about this book where I'll be reading the lines so that you too will get the Sarah J Maas flashbacks with me. Moving on to the next book, I have made a video about this already. This is Verity by Colleen Hoover. I went back and forth on whether this should be first place or second place. It really should be interchangeable at this point because this whole book was just like a hot mess. Verity is about a writer who is dealing with some financial struggles, but then she gets offered the role of a lifetime, which is to be a ghostwriter for a very famous author named Verity. This author can no longer write because she recently went through an accident, so she is confined to her bed and she is unable to complete her series that a lot of readers are anticipating for. This author has a husband who sought out the main girl specifically to help write the books. In order to really immerse herself and pick up where the author left off, the main girl gets to stay at Verity's house and live with the husband. However, when she's rifling through all of the paperwork in Verity's office, she uncovers a manuscript that has not been published. It turns out to be an unfinished autobiography that Verity wrote and she had never intended for anyone to read. And so the main girl is like, oh my god, tea. So as we go through the present day events of the book, where the main girl is living inside this house and she feels this attraction towards the husband, but she's like, oh my god, I can't make any moves because his wife is right there. At the same time, she's reading a manuscript very slowly, by the way. She reads like 1 chapter a day. I know it's so that you can really draw out the story throughout the book that we're reading, but as a writer, realistically, she would have finished that in like half a day, especially when a lot of the contents from the book were gagging her, because in the manuscript, Verity is talking about how she and Jeremy got together. She details their sexcapades. They do it at a Steak and Shake. I don't know why Steak and Shake had to be dragged like that. Apparently it gets so wild that when they do it in bed, she has to bite down the headboard like she's a fucking beaver in order to stifle her moans, instead of, I don't know, just putting a rag or a pillow in her mouth. You know, while she's confined to bed and seeing a doctor, I think we should also get a dentist to check up on her teeth, because biting a headboard that often is really not okay. The weird thing is, even though this book is supposed to be a thriller, we spend so much time on all of these unnecessary sex scenes. I don't know why. Maybe Colleen thought that this would add to the atmosphere of being disturbed, but as the main girl reads more of the manuscript, she starts to realize how unhinged Verity is, because she becomes so obsessed with Jeremy that by the time she has children, she gets jealous of the children because they are taking away Jeremy's love from her. So she acts like a really bad mom, basically neglects her kids, is downright abusive to them. There's some ableism as well, because she talks about how one of the kids is autistic and this is seen as like a bad thing. And the main girl reading this is like, oh my god, this is so horrible. But maybe this kind of justifies me getting into his pants. So she and Jeremy start to have a thing in present day, and they start to have their own sexcapades while his wife is like comatose in her own bed in the same house. But the main girl, when she's having sex with Jeremy, she tries to replicate the same sex scenes by biting on the same headboard. I'm like, girl, you're not trying to measure your teeth to get a night guard, okay? You don't need to clamp your teeth on the same bite marks as Verity. This is giving weirdo behavior. And then the ending, it's just so ridiculous. I feel like some authors like Colleen Hoover and Taryn Fisher, who wrote The Wives, and by the way, they're friends, and I really see the influences between their works. I feel like they think a good plot twist is gaslighting when it's not. It's just like, okay, so why the fuck did I read this then? Again, if you want the details of everything that happens in the book, I have a separate video dedicated to it. But the reason why I'm putting this as number 2 for now instead of number 1 is because even though it is badly written and most of it is sex scenes and it doesn't make any sense and there's so many plot holes, I can understand that Colleen was trying to disturb you as a reader, I guess, because these characters aren't supposed to be morally great people anyway. Like, they're supposed to be shitty people. They're supposed to do terrible things. I don't think you're supposed to root for anyone. Meanwhile, the book that I put as the number 1 spot has terrible characters, but you're not supposed to think they're terrible. So that's gonna segue into the final book, The Bottom of the Barrel, November 9th, by the same author, Colleen Hoover, and I also have a video dedicated to that book. Again, these 2 books are interchangeable because they're both badly written. They both have terrible characters. Nothing makes sense. I don't know why either of them were published, but if I could try to justify some kind of ranking for November 9 being first place, is because this is supposed to be a romance book and you're supposed to root for them to be together. The main guy is an aspiring novelist, which is already a red flag in itself. Like, you got a writing major here? I'm just kidding about the writing majors part. However, the actual offensive thing here is his writing itself, because you do get to see excerpts of his writing in between the chapters, and it reads like the most mundane Tumblr poetry bullshit. I don't think it's even fair to compare it to Tumblr poetry because the girlies over there can write leagues ahead of him. Anyway, the main girl who unfortunately ends up with this loser is a girl who had a very tragic accident a couple years ago where she was caught in a house fire. This fire left her scarred all over her body and it pretty much upended her career. She was an up-and-coming actress. Her dad is a famous actor, and so as a nepo baby, she pretty much had her job in the bag. But with the fire that happened that basically scarred her body all over the place, it made her lose on all of these job opportunities, and it also tanked her self-esteem. She's very insecure about herself and her looks and the way that other people look at her. So she meets the main guy in this book when she is having an argument with her dad at this diner, and this guy, who happens to be sitting behind the table, swoops in and pretends to be her boyfriend. Instead of being creeped out by this, she goes along with with it, and they start this fake relationship along the way where they just flirt with each other. However, that day is the same day where she is flying from LA to New York, and they decide instead of exchanging phone numbers or contact information, they should meet every year on November 9 to catch up with each other. This guy's supposed to be super great for her because he validates her as a human being and as an attractive woman, because he will constantly tell her how beautiful and sexy she is by objectifying her. Like, he will constantly bring up her underwear. Like, literally, there are so many times where he brings up the color of her underwear. He tries to guess it, he wants to see it, he offers to help her pack up for her flight so that he can look through her underwear drawer. Like, this guy is obsessed. But he keeps on talking about this, like, literally from the first day that they met. It's his whole shtick, and I think that Colleen Hoover kept on bringing it up as like a running joke, as a way to show his boyish charm, I guess. But it's just like, dude, get a new shtick at this point, because it's getting tired. The disturbing thing though is that you're reading from both of their perspectives. So while you're reading her perspective, feeling so validated by this man who's objectifying her, you get to read his point of view, where he literally is thinking from the moment that he saw her in the diner what her underwear is looking like, and how he wishes that she wore more revealing clothing. And the whole reason why he's sexualizing her is because he thinks that she shouldn't be ashamed of her scars, because he still finds her sexy. And isn't that what matters the most in the end? But I think what the most annoying thing is the whole time that he's trying to like comfort her and give her confidence to like not be so insecure about her scars, he constantly tells her that the only thing that's really holding her back from connecting with other people or having romance in her life is because she lets those insecurities hold her back. He literally tells her that the reason why men aren't approaching her and talking to her is because they can tell that she's so insecure and drawing herself back, and it's not because of the scars. So he's literally just putting the blame on her. I can understand the logic behind this, and maybe on the surface level it makes sense. Like, if I had a lobotomy, yeah, I could understand this logic and agree with it. However, as someone with at least 2 brain cells, I can at least understand that it is extremely insensitive to tell someone who dealt with a very traumatic incident that left burn scars all over her body that she is the one holding herself back. Is super insensitive, and it's victim blaming, and it overly simplifies the whole situation. Maybe one of the factors is that she draws herself away from society and keeps to herself and doesn't put herself out there. But that doesn't fully explain the reason why society may treat her badly as a disfigured person. People are assholes, and a lot of men are shallow. So for her to be self-conscious about this and assume that men don't want her isn't something that she just made up on her own. You know what? I actually do feel confident that I'm gonna put this book in first place for the worst book, because this guy was just so fucking annoying. If he wasn't going on and on about the color of her underwear, he was trying to make some weird ass Make-A-Wish Foundation speech about how she should be confident in herself, and the whole audacity for him to do that in the first place. Once you know the twist that gets revealed at the end of the book, if you have watched the video or read the book, you know what I'm talking about. That just adds a whole layer to the audacity of this man. He's a shitty writer. He has no creativity because his only pickup line is talking about your underwear. He fetishizes your scars. He tells you to your face that it's your own fault that people feel uncomfortable around you. This guy literally does not offer anything to the table. Like, this girl's life is so fucking tragic, and she's stuck with this asshole. You know what's worse than being an asshole? An annoying asshole. I could not tolerate a single day with this guy. I couldn't. I would commit murder. He is by far the worst love interest that I have read so far. So that pretty much wraps up the worst books that I have read for this year. Who knows what other madness I will uncover in the new year. However, if you have enjoyed watching this video and hearing me trash talk about these horrible love interests, one video idea that I have that will probably be the next video coming up in the new year will be a tier ranking video where I am gonna rank all of the love interests that I have read in 2023. So you'll have that to look forward to. In the meantime, I hope you have a safe and happy holiday, and I'll see you in the new year in January. Bye! Mistletoe and champagne, I'll pour it on Christmas morning. Everything on your list, it's waiting if you go looking for it.